My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
Beyond the first and second-hand repercussions of our actions, there is always a certain limit to just how many people's lives we can affect or change in our lifetime. There are two major factors playing in the premise of this statement: space and time. Although we've seemed to somehow play around and manipulate the issue of space, since we can literally broadcast something live all over the globe, we are still confined to our lifetime to some degree. At least some more than others. Yet there are those who, through what they do, manage to outlast their own lifetime and survive as beacons from another time. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is one of these people. The proof? The fact that it is probably not the first time that you are hearing this piece of music playing in the background. In 1813, 39 years after Mozart's death, the Russian composer Alexander Pushkin released a play called Mozart and Salieri, which depicts animosity between the two composers, leading Salieri to eventually poison Mozart and finish by contemplating whether a genius would commit murder. In the late 20th century, Peter Schaffer wrote a piece of drama called Amadeus, inspired by Pushkin's own play. The historical accuracy of this play is highly criticized, so much so that I would go as far to say that as far as Schaffer was concerned, the fact that the two composers existed and lived in the same time was enough of a premise for him. And so it will be enough for us. I do not mean to say that anything else in the play is historically inaccurate, but some of it is. And in our case, it is really quite irrelevant to the thematic concerns of the play. Let us start by examining our narrator. Historically, Antonio Salieri was a highly respected subject in the Habsburg court in Vienna. He's even considered to be an important figure in the development of opera in the 18th century, and out of the many pupils he had, he also taught Franz Liszt, Franz Schubert, and even Ludwig van Beethoven. It is also interesting to note that he eventually also taught one of Mozart's own sons. But again, beyond the trivial historic intrigue, this is irrelevant to us. In Milos Forman's adaptation of Schaffer's play, Salieri is introduced to us in a scene where he is attempting suicide in his own home after screaming Mozart's name and asking for his forgiveness for his murder. This is a very particular character introduction, and it works beautifully because after his failed attempt, we go straight to the confession, and we start to understand who Salieri is and how this event came to happen. When the confession starts, the priest tells him that all men are equal in God's eyes, which is what essentially triggers Salieri to start the story. Salieri discovers his love of music as a young boy and knew with certainty that he wanted to become a composer, but his father would not have it. Yet he prayed to God so that he would make him a great composer, whose music would become immortal, and in exchange, he bound his soul to God's service. So when his father died, he interpreted this death as a blessing from God. A blessing in two ways: the fact that he is now free to do what he loves, and a nod from God himself to pursue his passion. In the film, Salieri calls his father's death a miracle. I would also argue that even Forman's and Schaffer's choice of music in this momentous scene points to the young boy's ambitions, as the song playing as his father chokes to death is a piece by the fellow Italian composer Giovanni Battista Pergolesi, who himself, like Salieri, was also commissioned to write for the royalty of Austria in his day. To Salieri, Mozart was a hero. Salieri loved music, and so, like any lover of music, he knew when he heard great music, and he knew that Mozart was a great composer. He was my idol, Mozart. I can't think of a time when I didn't know his name. I was still playing childish games when he was playing music for kings and emperors, even the Pope in Rome. Right before the first encounter, Salieri seals this pre-Mozart chapter in his own life by explaining that he was involved in teaching music, playing for the court, and essentially being a celebrity of the time. As he himself says, everybody liked me and I liked myself. He was the primary character in God's plan, the same plan he believed in for most of his life. Of course, on the occasion when he was supposed to encounter Mozart for the very first time, you can feel his own curiosity and anticipation as he waltzes around the salon, wondering who out of all of these young men could the young composer be. This scene sets the stage for the shattering of Salieri's bubble. And the moment when Salieri witnesses the impish, childlike character playing around with his future wife Costanza on the floor of this palace, and realizes that this is the man himself, suddenly, Mozart becomes a negation of everything that Salieri ever believed in. Even Peter Schaffer was surprised by this, when in doing research for the play, he came across some of Mozart's letters. I was struck by the contrast between the sublimity of his music and the vulgar buffoonery of his letters. I am often criticized for portraying him as an imbecile, but I was actually conveying his childlike side. His letters read like something written by an 8-year-old. At breakfast, he'd be writing this puerile, foul-mouthed stuff to his cousin. By evening, he'd be completing a masterpiece. To Salieri, the irony is almost as loud as the music. As he sees this young kid who had written his first concerto at the age of 4, chasing a girl under a table in the Archbishop of Austria's residence, Salieri's relationship with God takes a strange, unexpected turn. We must try and understand Salieri here, for just a moment. It was many times that I had the thought of, for instance, trying to imagine a band opening for the Beatles, for example, and just how ridiculous a task that would be in the face of their immense popularity, both commercially and critically. I'm sure that Schaffer or Pushkin had similar thoughts somehow. The idea of being a contemporary with a genius or someone who revolutionized your own field in your own time. Salieri constantly suggests that he is the only man who is aware of the immense beauty of Mozart's art, and naturally this is another dimension to his solitary burden. This leads Salieri to the dark well of envy. Envy is a strange emotion because it not only causes whoever it inhabits to potentially do horrible things, but it also painfully crushes them with self-disparaging thoughts stemming from one of the crucial triggers of envy, the need to compare. And like a well, the deeper it goes, the darker it becomes. His ambition to write beautiful music becomes an ambition to destroy any shred of legacy stemming from his contemporary, by driving him to madness and eventually death. He feels cheated, and so his hate is not just towards Mozart, but towards God or life itself. In his mind, Salieri now has become a secondary character in his vision of musical destiny, and he will not stand for this. The culmination of Salieri's evil truly begins here, when he, taking advantage of the fact that Mozart is in a feverish and paranoid state, commissions a requiem from him in the guise of his dead father, in order to pass it on as his own work after Mozart dies. Here, the desperate need for validation and immortality reaches an absurdly grotesque level. Salieri imagines Mozart's funeral as the ultimate stage where he would be able to pass the requiem as his own work and come out victorious with fame and glory, for not only having written such immensely beautiful music, but also for appearing to have done it for someone who in his own heart and mind was a genius and an unparalleled composer. The possession of envy turns the character of Salieri inside out, and all that we can see at this point is the darkness within. When Mozart eventually dies, there is no grand ceremony. The colors of the film disappear, and we are left with a small, unceremonious affair. As for the remaining years of Salieri, as he recounts to the priest at the end of the film, his own music grew fainter and fainter, disappearing into the void of time in his own lifetime. Unlike Mozart's, whose music is the subject of this film, and to some extent, this video that you are seeing now. The music in this film is always very much present. It is a leading character as much as Salieri and Mozart themselves. Its presence in a film with such a subject heightens the irony of it all. Even the introductory scene, with Salieri being carried out on a stretcher bleeding to death, is set to a piece by Mozart. It is somehow implied that this music is being played in Salieri's mind, but nonetheless, we recognize it. That is all that matters. We have no idea who this man is at this point, and maybe we have no idea who the man behind the music playing is either, yet we somehow know the music. I would venture to say that half of the music in the film, or at least 2 to 3 pieces, are already known by the viewers before they've watched the film, and this music is from over 200 years ago. It is a great but humbling achievement that something so beautiful should persist through people's lifetimes and countless generations. For whatever reason, Mozart's music became a part of the universal fabric and managed to keep its place for centuries after his death. Yet, as Schaffer portrays it, as Salieri is pushed through the asylum, absolving his fellow inmates of all mediocrities, all we see of him is a man destroyed by jealousy and regret. There is, I find, a certain comment on the persistence of greatness, and a beautifully optimistic idea that it would prevail and rise to the surface no matter the hindrances it finds in its way. The film depicts this in the simplest and most obvious way possible, yet we might miss it if we don't stop to think for a second. The story being told is wrapped up neatly in the apt name of the main character himself, Amadeus, which of course, in the spirit of this eternal cosmic irony, means loved by God.
Senza